Stephen King has been an influence on Silent Hill since his pseudonym was referenced in the first game. Never more so than in Shattered Memories, however, Climax Studio's second entry into the franchise. It's King's brand of psychological thrills that feels the most pervasive throughout the game, right from the opening car crash to the page-turning bites of mystery to the focus on flawed small-town characters and a less than perfect protagonist. It paints the edges. Harry Mason himself is a writer, much like King's protagonists often are, and the echoes of the lives you can eavesdrop into have a sense of natural human drama. Small realities like parents arguing in front of their child or the uncapped cruelty of high school kids. It's all reminiscent of texts like Carrie, Misery and Sleeping Beauties. I bring this up because while Silent Hill has a vague King connection, it never seems to burst the bubble of monster imagery or general ideas from The Mist and again perhaps Carrie or Pet Sematary. Shattered Memories seems to dig a little differently into its influences but pulls out something altogether new, yet very befitting of the Silent Hill mantra, and it all starts with the story.
Well, it says you live at 11th Street. That's a few blocks from here.
11th Street. That's where I live.
That accident of yours, you take a knock to the head?
Harry crashes into Silent Hill and loses sight of his daughter, Cheryl, and spends the rest of the game looking for her. If that sounds familiar, it's because Shattered Memories operates as a reimagining of the original game's scenario. It bears superfluous connections, such as retaining some character names and locations, but all reworked to fit the tone and style of this interpretation. To some, that might seem like minor sacrilege. I happen to think it's genius, because it's primed and ready to subvert your expectations almost immediately. Some may argue that Climax could have opted to use a fresh set of characters, and to be fair, if they did, the game would mostly hold solid and ultimately execute on its ideas just as well. Only having a setup so similar to the original, just with different characters, may have brought upon it accusations of unoriginality. By overtly reshaping what's already been, it avoids this distracting notion and to boot has your preconceptions in a bag, ready to be shaken. The first instance of which is in how the game is structured.
Or false? Is it true to say you're a private person? Would you say it takes a while for people to get to know you?
You're given something new for the series almost immediately. A framing device in the shape of one-to-one sessions with a psychologist named Kaufman. These interactive conversations are returned to throughout the game and are mechanically novel for the series too. While it's not presenting dialogue options akin to an RPG, it's still an interactive face-to-face with arguably more interesting choices. Throughout this strand of the game, you'll take part in some brief psychological tests that assess your own personal traits, the results of which are shown in how the game world molds itself as you explore the town in the more traditional portions of the game. This includes what you see in the environment, the way other characters look and behave, as well as Harry's own personality. The system profiles not only your answers in the therapy sessions, but also your subtleties within the world. Small things like where you direct your attention, which directions you take and rooms you enter, how thorough you are and how you go about solving puzzles. It's comprehensive enough to be more than just a gimmick, yet could also be taken forward and developed into something truly compelling for games even outside of Silent Hill. As it stands, what the system adds is novelty, where it could be carving a new way in which we interact with interactive fiction. Yet it still feels like a much more natural approach than the cut and dry choices we usually make between good and bad in a lot of narrative based games. This is the game's core strength. Never does it ask you to pick between A or B in an arbitrary way. The methods in which the game feeds off the player allows for the consequences to more naturally adorn the story, as to never leaving you thinking, but what if I picked differently? Without the hint of such a device, you might not even know the game was doing it, which I think is a level of subtlety very much unseen amongst games with similar ambitions to shape-shifting narratives. I can only imagine the functionality of a more developed system, perhaps with Rorschach tests and marking images as disturbing, going on to determine what kind of monsters you'll encounter and what environments you'll be led to, specifically moulded to the player's fears. While it's not quite at that level, the profiling provides a good foundation for a great conversation between the player and game, and has since been echoed in games such as Until Dawn. Silent Hill, however, was always tapped into its character's psyche, and moving that focus onto the player's own mind is a particularly profound progression within that formula. Perhaps not as extremely affecting as the title's psychological warning implies, but nonetheless a really interesting way to shape a horror experience. If the psychological profiling represents an evolution for the series, then the specific narrative beats keep Shattered Memories firmly anchored in Silent Hill tradition. While structurally divergent, the story still retains a sense of emotional variety that sticks closely to the tenets of some of the best examples in the series. Silent Hill can often be quite funny, absurd, and in many cases, tragic. It's a big part of why the series tends to transcend the typical boundaries of its genre, like Silent Hill 2's sense of pathos and 3's lingering anxiety. The twist in Shattered Memories not only provides an emotional gut punch to those not expecting it, but is totally in keeping with the themes of grief, sadness and trauma that give the series its unique texture. It functions similarly to the revelation of the original games too, as it recontextualizes the events, providing clarity to even the flavor stories you find echoed around the town, a lot of which happen to relate to Harry. The danger of a twist is that it can be a narrative crutch rather than a strength, defining a story by a moment rather than using said moment to shine a brighter light on the piece as a whole. You still need a carefully crafted tale and set of events that make sense with the newly acquired knowledge of an audience. Shattered Memories' twist not only adds clarity to the events, but also coats the story in a poignant sense of sadness and sympathy. You get something new upon a second playthrough of the game, again, very in keeping with how the prior games functioned.
What are you doing here, Harry?
Looking for Cheryl. Isn't this my house? Who are you?
For those who have played the game, you'll be aware that the therapy sessions are actually a present-day circumstance involving Cheryl Mason, rather than the initially assumed Harry, who in fact died in the very car crash that opens the game. The story is about Cheryl's grief for her lost father and her projection of his character, who we play, as physically manifested by Silent Hill. Or not, it's kept slightly vague. Knowing Harry was dead the whole time tinges your control of him with a sense of melancholy, the same kind as when a child gets their first taste of the realities of the world, a loss of innocence you could never hope to prevent. It's a feeling that corresponds to some of Stephen King's work, which is why I opened with the reference. The inevitability of such things is a constant, same with how Harry will only ever continue to exist in his daughter's shattered memories. How Cheryl remembers her father is influenced by the player's actions and results of the psychological profile. It's a great intersection of mechanics and narrative, right where the story peaks and cashes in on where the expectations of the player began, turning the familiar premise on its head and using the game's newfound structure to do so. Shattered Memories subverts in nearly all the right ways.
Be careful.
Sure.
Harry.
You said enough. Let's just... Sweetie, don't film this. You know this has nothing to do with you, right? Even though Mom and Dad don't love each other anymore, we both love you. And we always will. Now, come on.
I say nearly because there's still a third strand to the game that I've neglected to mention thus far. Shattered Memories forgoes combat entirely, replacing it with chase sequences. You simply run through a maze-like environment until you find the exit and it's all over. There are opportunities to hide, but they feel not only pointless but quite futile, as I never found them to be too secure. Considering there's no indication of a stealth system either, it felt like there was never any point to the option. Moreover, the design of these sequences feel plainly artificial and simply a way to quickly move you from point A to B whenever the story needs. If your next objective is a ways away, you can be guaranteed to be pulled into the other world and then sprint your way there, coming out of the chase conveniently nearby the next story location. The game's performance is at its worst here too, as the frame rate melts whenever you bash through a door and sometimes begins to chug more generally. Leaving combat behind could have been a refreshing change for the franchise, and for the parts where the game leaves you alone, it is. Only the chases quickly become moments you sigh at because they're quite honestly boring. They betray the game's ability to elicit much tension in its moment-to-moment exploration too. The chases are clearly segmented into occurrences exclusive to the otherworld. Your only option is to run, and given such a large indication, you could never be taken off guard, as clearly defined as they are. There's no opportunity for enemies to step across the artificial barrier, and so you know when you're safe and when you are not. There's a couple of sequences where the game does get creative with its encounters however. Throughout the game, you'll often find yourself left in a car with the small task of getting out of it, which gets you used to the point and click style of these moments before the game throws you into an identical sequence, only this time while the car floats to the bottom of Toluca Lake. It's a sudden claustrophobic nightmare as the car fills with water, and not even getting out of it feels like an option with Rorschachs surrounding you. It's unexpected and a brilliant moment of sorely needed horror in a game that is usually pretty laid back for a Silent Hill experience. If the chase sequences were replaced with life-threatening puzzles like this, I think it would have made for a better fit. As a game experimenting with the fundamentals of its series, I think Shattered Memories succeeds where it counts in forming a memorable and worthy experience to bear the Silent Hill name. In fact, I'd go so far as to argue that the narrative couldn't really be better placed anywhere outside of this very franchise. It uses the expectations that come with the brand to deliver a story that subverts surface expectations, while staying true to the ethos of the series. In the psychological profiling, the game also delivers a system with some real mechanical value, which is also commendable for being a new interaction relevant to the themes of the franchise. I for one found the summary of my choices in the final write-up to not be far from accurate. While there are a few hiccups within the delivery of certain aspects of the game, it's overall a fresh take on how to reinterpret a text through a new lens, without losing its identity. Shattered Memories subtly pulls from all corners of Silent Hill, and for its understanding of what made those games work, I feel that it's more than worthy to sit alongside them.
Cheryl. This is your room. But you're not in it.